Welcome to the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast. I'm your host, Craig Nash, Senior Editor at Good Faith Media. Each episode, we explore and discuss the weekly texts and lessons found in Good Faith magazine. For the July, August, and September 2026 installment of the Bible Studies, I'll be inviting special guests to join me in sharing our thoughts and ideas about the passage and ways small groups might approach each week's lesson. We are glad you're here, so let's dive in. This week's passage comes from Luke chapter 15, verses 3 through 32. So he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep." Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me a share of the wealth that will belong to me.' So he divided his assets between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant region, and there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that region, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that region, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father, but while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" We always like to begin these episodes with my first impression of this passage. I do need to say what we didn't include in this week's reading was a setup to the parable, which was that Jesus was eating with the quote-unquote wrong kind of people, and the religious people around him were grumbling about it, which seems to be a common setup for many of Jesus's parables. Jesus responds to these grumbling religious people with 3 parables, or perhaps one parable, depending on which way you look at it. It is, you might say, a 3-in-1 parable or a parable with 3 variations. All of them have 2 things in common. The first is something or someone that is lost, and the second is a person who values that thing or person enough to go looking for it. The third parable, though, has something slightly different, which is that the thing that is lost, which is a person with agency, the son, must find his way back to his father. The father misses him and seems to be continuously scanning the horizon, yes, actively looking for him, but the son must begin the process to get there first, unlike the coin and the sheep who are just out lost. Something else struck me about this parable that I don't think I'd noticed before. In the first 2 variations of this lost and found parable, Jesus begins the story with a question that seems to operate on a higher level than a typical question. In the first, which is about lost sheep and a shepherd, Jesus asks, "Which of you, if this happens, wouldn't go looking for your sheep and celebrate once it's been found?" And in the second variation, he asks, "What woman, if she lost her coins, wouldn't turn her house upside down to find them and ask her friends to celebrate with her?" These questions seem to be more than just questions. They seem to me to be accusations against the religious people grumbling, as if the implication is that their answer probably would be that they wouldn't do those things. They probably wouldn't go looking for the lost thing, and they certainly wouldn't celebrate once those animals have been found, as they have shown in their grumbling. And then in the third variation of this parable, he removes that question from the formula. He just kind of launches into the parable, but then he adds an element that isn't in the first 2, which is this: a bystander who has an opinion about what's going on. This new element feels like an indictment on that bystander at first, and then you realize it is both an indictment and it's also an expression of love and grace toward the bystander as well. It's as if Jesus is talking to these grumbling religious folks about something deeper than what they are grumbling about, and telling them that he sees them, and that he sees what is underneath their anger at who they believe are the quote-unquote wrong kind of people who are receiving Jesus' attention. And he wants these people to know that they are also loved. And with that, I will be right back. Welcome back. This week I'm flying solo without a guest, which may be for the best, because a conversation about this particular parable or collection of parables would likely stretch into hours. There's so many elements to it, and you've likely heard a million different sermons and lessons that focus on one or another aspect of the parable that you haven't thought of before. You've probably heard so many of these so much that you could be my special guest for this week. So I hope you will see yourself as that. I just want to touch on a couple of aspects of the Good Faith Bible Studies curriculum today, which was written by Sean Palmer. Sean is the CEO of Sean Palmer Consulting. He's the homiletician in residence at Bamel Church in Houston. And he is the co-host of the Sacred Frames podcast, where he examines popular films through the lens of someone who follows Jesus. Sean is also a contributor for Good Faith Media's online news and opinion, which can be found at goodfaithmedia.org. I'm so thankful for Sean's scholarship and his highlighting a few elements of this passage that aren't immediately evident to the untrained eye. One of those is one you may have heard before, but is always good to be reminded of, which is this idea that in an honor-shame culture, a son asking his father for his inheritance before the father has died is the equivalent of wishing the father was dead. So in this parable, we're dealing with more than just a son who wants to go away and live a wild life. We are dealing with a son who has open contempt for his father, which helps us understand the anger of the older brother who stayed. Another element Sean brings up that I hadn't really heard before is this historical understanding in a patriarchal culture that it was undignified for men to run. So we're also not just looking at a normal father who stands on his perch in judgment, but we're looking at a father whose love is so deep that he will kind of stoop below his standing in the world to go after his son, who is already on his way back to him. And then there's this aspect that Sean mentioned, that all of these symbols the father places onto his son, the robe, the ring, the sandals, aren't just accoutrements or apparel. And they say that this son's sonship has been restored. As Sean noted, the son's prepared speech basically ended up being useless because the father wouldn't even allow him to offer himself up as a slave. And then the question comes, how would I lead a group discussion on this? Well, as you know, the options are endless. I'd probably begin with just asking the group to compare and contrast these three stories and see if there are other aspects that stand out to them that we haven't named. I'd also ask them if there are modern equivalents to the stories that they can think of. I'm guessing most of your folks aren't shepherds, and hardly anyone cares about coins in our cashless society anymore. Almost cashless society. More than a few of you, though, I suspect will have people in your groups who resonate with the lost child story. But what other things do we lose that can be substituted for these parables? Then, lastly, an obvious, but I think still powerful question to ask is, where do you find yourself in this story? If your folks have been in church for any amount of time, they've likely been asked this question before. But is it possible that we might answer that question differently today than we did even last week, or even perhaps than we would have answered it before we began this class? Sean noted this kind of phenomenon of preachers in preaching this sermon, how uneasy it can be because you may have people in your group or in your congregation who occupy both the younger and the older son's position. Is it possible that we always need reminding that God is always searching for us, whether we are far off or nearby? Thanks for joining me today, and I will return next week with another episode of the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast. I'm Craig Nash, and you've been listening to the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast from Good Faith Media. Our music comes from Pond 5. If you are not already a subscriber to Good Faith Magazine, learn more about how you can receive a copy of the magazine and Bible study curriculum at goodfaithmedia.org.